Hello and welcome to day 95. We are starting the book of Ruth today with chapters 1 and 2. We will have Psalms 53 and 61 and the fifth chapter of the second letter to the Corinthians. So we are starting the story of Ruth today. And I think one of the things for us to really pay attention to as we're reading through Ruth is that this is a story of ordinary people living ordinary lives. Sometimes it seems like a lot of the stories in the Hebrew Bible are about great kings and prophets, warriors, generals, leaders, or people who are royally screwing up in some way or another. But I think in this story, we can really see ourselves in the day to day decisions that these people are having to make. They are struggling with economic difficulties and famine. They are moving to new places and having to meet new people in order to support their families. People die, and there's the grief and loss of loved ones and members of the family who provided for the family. So they are searching for hope and for help, and they end up becoming part of God's story through their faithfulness. So I think there's a lot here that we can really connect with as far as some of the dynamics that we deal with in our everyday lives. So we've got Naomi, who is from Israel. She and her husband left because of the famine. They had a couple sons. Their sons ended up marrying women in Moab where they had settled. But the husband dies, the sons die, and none of the women have had more children. So they have a little bit of a problem here because they don't have anyone to care for them, to provide for them, and they are outside of their normal family circles, with Naomi being in a foreign land. So Naomi decides to go back, and the two daughters-in-law start back with her, but eventually Naomi's like, no, go back to your people, your gods, your language, your customs, your traditions. And Orpah decides to go back, and I really want to lift up that there's really no shame in this text for her making this decision. And I think sometimes she's kind of been downplayed for that. And a few years ago, I read a wonderful theologian's interpretation of this, and it was a theologian who came from the Cherokee culture here in the United States. And she pointed out that their tradition really lifts up Orpah for her faithfulness to her native land, her native gods, her native people and language, especially for the Cherokee people who were so often torn apart and banned from practicing their language or their religion or their traditions. They really celebrate Orpah's decision to be faithful to her original family. Now, Ruth stays with Naomi and goes with her to Israel and has the famous line of, your people will be my people and your God will be my God. Ruth shows her faithfulness in her caring for Naomi. She's made a decision and she's going to see it through. And that faithfulness is what God sees in her. She doesn't know what's going to happen. She doesn't know anything about this country. She's not familiar with this, but she still decides to go. So, one of the things I think we really have to reflect on as we read this story is Ruth is a foreigner. Now, Ruth's name has become a somewhat common name in our culture. Many people have been named Ruth, and so this name doesn't seem like an outsider name. We're familiar with this. And so sometimes it's hard for us to really understand what a foreigner Ruth was to the people of Israel when she moved back with Naomi. Many human cultures have struggled with the us and them concept through time of who is with us, who is against us, who's an outsider, who's an outcast, who's a foreigner. And are there different rules and regulations? Are there different benefits and privileges for people who are on the inside compared to people on the outside? It's something that our country is really struggling with right now. Exactly what should our immigration laws be? Who should be welcomed here? What privileges and rights should they have? What is the process for becoming a citizen in our country? And I think we have to really hold on to this story as God's message that we are to be welcoming strangers, we are to be welcoming outsiders. Now, at the end of the reading today, there's this thing about covenant redeemers or redeeming kinsmen, depending on what translation. There may be different ways of explaining this. In the Jewish tradition, these were men in the family who had a special obligation to make sure that the entire family anyone related to the family was taken care of. So in this case, they especially had to take care of widows and orphans. So we've got Naomi and Ruth, whose husbands have died. They do not have children who are going to grow up and care for these women. And so the covenant redeemers or redeeming kinsmen then take on the obligations of husband or provider to make sure that the family line continues through additional children and that the people are taken care of by being fed and provide shelter. Psalm 53, we have a psalmist who's very frustrated with the lack of faithfulness to God among the people and is really asking the question of who is going to lead Israel back to God. Psalm 61 is a psalm of prayer for the self as well as a prayer for the king and ends with asking God for help for both the self and for the king. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul is talking about how there are better times ahead for people because of the resurrection bodies that are promised to us after our lives here end. So Paul is really emphasizing a hope for the future and trying to get people to turn away from the fear and anxiety they have. The main thing he points out isn't personal salvation, but pleasing God. We live our lives to be in relationship with God, to honor God, and to please God. In response, we are offered the hope of a resurrection body. Paul really emphasizes the fact that Jesus died for everyone, not just one person or people. So he says we are not to be judging the people around us based on identity, such as race or gender or citizenship. Everyone is new in Jesus. And this, I think, ties into what's going on in Ruth, where God is clearly welcoming foreigners and people who were considered outside into the life of faith with the faith family. So I think this is one of the things for us to be thinking about and working through. What does this message mean for us today when we are thinking about people with different citizenship and different immigration status and different national origins? What is God calling us to do, and how is God calling us to treat these neighbors? Reflect on that today, and we'll see you next time.